right, buckle up. We're going to do something a little bit different today. We've been making our way through the book of Exodus, mostly going verse by verse through the story. Today we're going to zoom out a little bit, and we're going to take on 4 chapters of the story, because we've arrived at this moment that we've kind of been working towards, this moment that God has been foreshadowing, that there's going to be a battle between good and evil, between the God of Israel and the gods of Egypt. And the way that this battle is going to take place is that God is going to send 10 plagues on the nation of Egypt. And often what happens when we read the Bible is we love to zero in on one specific thing. We like to look at one particular thing and then just pull it apart as much as we can. And why did God do this? And how did God do this? And just try and dissect it. And that is okay. That's a good way to study the Bible. But occasionally there are times where we do that and we miss kind of the bigger story. This part of Scripture is meant to be understood in its entirety. And so we're going to take these few chapters and we're going to just kind of fly over them at about 30,000 feet, and occasionally we'll come down to ground level. But I'm not going to dwell on each little detail of each of the plagues, because it would take us days, first of all, but we would miss sort of the larger story of what's going on. And I really want you to see this. And so we're going to kind of do this flyover of it, and we're going to get right into it. So Exodus 7, if you got a Bible with you, get it out. If you got it on your phone, love for you to follow along. Exodus chapter 7. The work that we do today is going to set us up for Easter weekend next Sunday. Just get your mind around what's been going on in the story. Get back into the scene. So God's people, the Israelites, have been enslaved in Egypt. They've been there. They've been mistreated for centuries now. And God had promised redemption. He's promised to rescue them. And he starts to let that plan unfold. It starts with a guy named Moses. He sends Moses to confront the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, to say, let my people go. God is starting to make this sort of plan a reality. And so we're just going to walk through this a little bit today, this story. And I want to give you 2 words to think about. I want to give you 2 words just to have at the front of your mind as we go through this story. The words are humility and obedience. And as we walk through this story, I want you to see how humility and obedience can shape our interactions and our relationship with God. So Exodus 7, let's jump right in. We're going to go slow through these first few verses, and then we're just going to go at hyper speed through the story. So Exodus 7, here we go. Here's what it says. So then the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, just meaning you're my representative, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet. You are to say everything that I command you, and your brother Aaron is to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelite people go out of his country. But I, God says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to me. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt, and with mighty acts of judgment, I will bring out my divisions, my people, the Israelites. And the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord, that I am Yahweh, when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out. Verse 6 says that Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded them. Okay, let's set up here just for a minute, because God is setting the scene of what's going to happen. And honestly, these few verses, I probably spent a half a day on this passage this week. There's so much to unpack. Let me just point out a couple of things that I think are important to the story. One is, if you notice that word judgment that God uses, he says that I'm going to bring judgment on Egypt. So remember the scene. God has promised and watched. He's promised redemption. He's watched as his children have been mistreated now for upwards of 400 years. And so you get the sense a little bit that dad is ticked. Dad's been watching what you're doing to his sons and daughters, and now he's going to act. And so whatever is about to happen to Egypt, all that to say is it's well-deserved. Like, they have it coming to them for what they've done. Also, I would just parse something really fast. Just to clarify, judgment, this word judgment, right? Just so we're all clear. Judgment is happening for the sins of Egypt. Judgment is not going to fall on Israel in this case, because God, just tuck this away, has nothing to do with today's message. God doesn't judge or punish his sons and daughters. Remember that, okay? So when you're thinking about this word judgment, it doesn't punish his sons and daughters because the punishment for our sin has already been poured out, right? But he is pouring it out on Egypt, and rightfully so. Something else I want you to see is the way God frames this. God says, I am about to bring my hand against Egypt. Now, certainly the Old Testament oftentimes talks about the hand of God, meaning his power, his strength, his might. What's interesting to me is that God doesn't say, I am about to bring my full weight against Egypt, or I am about to unleash the full authority of heaven and earth on these clowns, or like I am going to use all of my energy. It's almost as if God goes, I'm going to bring my hand, almost as if to say, hey, you're going to see some pretty cool, incredible stuff. I don't really have to work that hard. It's like one hand. I'm going to use like my pinky finger and take these guys out. It's like I just have in my mind a toddler who's acting up and thinking that they're the whole world, and it takes a parent like one hand just to go, all right, calm down, and it's done, right? I think that there's something about this that like God is not panicked. He's totally in control. One hand, I can control this whole thing with one hand. And then the last thing I want to show you is just that phrase at the end, Moses did just as God commanded him. Because remember, it's a story of humility and obedience. This is the canvas that God has laid for how it all starts to come together. So what happens? Well, first God gives Pharaoh a chance to be humble. He sends him a sign, right? He's told him to let the people go, and he sends him a sign to show him that, hey, I mean business right now. So what he does is he sends Moses and Aaron into the palace to talk to Pharaoh, and Aaron takes his staff, God tells him to do this, Aaron takes his staff and he throws it on the ground, and it turns into a snake. We've seen this play out before, but he does it again, right? Now, the problem is that Pharaoh has magicians and sorcerers who work for him, and they can do the same thing. And so they also take their staffs and they throw them on the ground, and they turn into snakes. Now, in the modern sort of Western world and our normal, what we see, what we think, guys, we don't see a lot of like supernatural, kind of spiritual, mystical things like this. But in the ancient world, and I would argue, and I could tell you stories, even in spiritually dark corners of the world today, this stuff happens. There's magic, there is sorcery, there is evil, right? Like this is a real thing that's going on. But even in this one little story, this little glimpse right here, we actually find out how powerful God is, because Aaron's staff, as a snake, gobbles up all the other snakes. And so there should be this moment right now. We shouldn't even get to the plagues, because in this moment, Pharaoh should go like, whoa, this guy Yahweh is who he says that he is. And I don't like him, and I don't want to follow him, and I don't want to obey him, but I'm scared of him. And so I'm going to be humble, and I'm going to relent against the Israelites, right? You see this, it should be enough to go, hey, Israelites, U-Haul's coming. Get some moving boxes, you're headed out of town. But instead, here's what we get, verse 13. Yet, it says, despite all that he just saw, yet Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. And that sets the table for why God is going to send plagues. He's given him a chance, and his heart is hard. So here's your job today for the rest of our time, is for you to pay attention, maybe take some notes, whatever. Be on the lookout for humility and obedience. Also for arrogance and disobedience. And just watch how those play into this story. That's your assignment. So here we go, plagues. There's 10 of them, right? Let's get to them. Each one of the plagues is directed at one of the Egyptian gods. So God is going to start with the most powerful. He's going to start with the god of the Nile. He goes right at it. The Nile River not only is the god of the Nile, the most powerful of Egypt's gods, but the Nile River is everything in Egypt. The Nile River is really why they have power in the world, because it brings life and it brings industry and it brings commerce, and it's what brought all these nations to Egypt at the time. When there was a worldwide famine, they came there to get food. There was food there because there was the Nile. And so God goes right at it. So Moses says, if you will release the people, great. If you refuse to let my people go, the Nile River is going to turn blood red. Pharaoh goes, nope, not going to do it. And so guess what? The Nile River turns blood red. And this is a huge hit to Egypt. This is a huge hit to their economy. It says that all the fish die. It says the people can't drink the water. And so we're only one plague in, but you sort of go like, man, Pharaoh better listen. Like, for the sake of his country, if for no other reason, like, he better listen now. But Moses tells us that Pharaoh's heart became hard. It literally says that he walked back into the palace and acted like nothing ever happened. He didn't even let it sort of resonate in his heart and his mind what he had just witnessed. Just imagine this for a minute. Imagine seeing God at work. Imagine, even to this extreme, visibly seeing the hand of God. God has told you what he's going to do, and he does it. And you witness it yourself, and imagine walking away from that, refusing to even acknowledge it. Like just think, like, what is that? Where God is clearly at work, but you can't acknowledge it. I think it's arrogance. And I want to just pause on this for a minute. I'm not going to slow down on each of the plagues, but I think it's worth pausing here for a minute to ask, is it ever possible for us? Is it ever possible that God is working in our lives, that he's doing some things, and we choose to completely ignore it and not see it because it's not our timing, it's not the way we wanted it, it's not the result we wanted it, and so we know we saw God move, but our heart becomes hard, and we choose to ignore it, choose not to see it, and just sort of keep on complaining about how we want things to be. Because here's what scares me about this a little bit. God is really patient with us. He gives us lots of chances, right? Chance after chance after chance. But what is also true about God, his word tells us this, what is also true about God is that God will, over time, eventually give us the desires of our heart. And so if we choose to turn our back on God, if we choose our own sin, our own arrogance, our own desires, and we refuse to acknowledge God, do you know what God is going to do? Romans 1 says this. At some point, God goes, okay, here you go, if that's what you want. Like, he's a loving father. He's not intent upon demanding of anyone. So there is a point, his word tells us this, there is a point where God goes, okay, here you go. And if we refuse to see God's hand at work in our lives, is there a point where it becomes harder and harder and harder to see? And again, God's not going to force us, where it's almost so much that's like, this is just a heart check for me, almost so much as like, I can no longer, I've so long refused to be humble and see God at work that I can't see it anymore. Is there that point where your heart becomes so hard? Again, humility and obedience is what he's asking for. Well, let's keep moving. A week goes by. Pharaoh's had a week to think about things after the first plague and to change his posture. He doesn't, so here comes plague number 2. Plague number 2 is frogs. I don't know if you like frogs. I don't like frogs. I think they're slimy and gross. Those little suckers get in my pool, and they are fast to try and get them out of there. I make my kids fish them out. I don't want any part of that. Frogs infiltrate everything in Egypt. They come up into their homes, into their communities. It says that they're in the kitchen where they're making food. People are finding frogs in their beds. Like, this is gross. And you go, okay, come on. Pharaoh's got to get the point now, right? Like, Moses told him what was going to happen, and then all these frogs show up. He doesn't. He asks Moses to pray that the frogs would go away. As soon as they do, Moses writes that Pharaoh hardened his heart once again and refused to let the Israelites leave. I mean, he begs for God's mercy. God gives him that mercy, and he goes back to arrogance and disobedience. So we get plague number 3. Plague number 3 is gnats. They're little just bugs everywhere. Something interesting happens with this plague. Up to this point, the magicians and sorcerers have been able to mimic God's power. So they did the staff thing. They could do the water to blood thing. They could even do the frogs. They can't do the gnats. So we're only 3 plagues in. We're 3 plagues in, and God has outmatched them. 3 plagues in, and God has said, nobody rivals me. Like, okay, we played your little games, but you can't even do this. It's just bugs. You can't do that. And so you think now Pharaoh would go, okay, Moses' God is more powerful than my gods. Like, all right, okay. He doesn't. He doesn't even move the needle on his heart. His heart is hard. He refuses to let the Israelites leave. So you get plague number 4. This time it's disgusting flies. And Moses is clear. If you will let the Israelites go, It's all over. Like the suffering can end, Pharaoh, for you, for your people. Everything can go back to peaceful and good. The suffering stops right now if you will just let us go. He says, let us go on a journey out into the wilderness to worship God. And even after the blood, and even after the frogs, and even after the gnats, and now after the flies, God, for some reason, is so gracious that he still gives Pharaoh a chance to be humble. But instead, Pharaoh does this, something tricky. Chapter 8, verse 25. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, go, sacrifice to your God here in the land. And if you don't pay attention, you'll miss it. Because what is he doing? What did they ask? They had asked that we want to go out into the wilderness to worship God. He says, sure, you can worship your God, but he does something that we all love to do. He negotiates with God. Oh, okay, you can do what you want to do, but you have to do it on my terms. You can go and worship God, but you have to do it here in the land. I'm not letting you go out to the wilderness. You have to do it here in the land. You ever negotiated with God? I've negotiated with God. God, if you'll just get me through this. God, if you would just give me that. If you would just deliver me from that. Like stupid stuff. Like we all do this, right? I specifically remember a time, a younger version of me, I remember negotiating with God. I had a scratch-it lottery ticket, and I was like, if I win, I'll give half the money to the church, God. God didn't think I needed that money, apparently, because I didn't win. But like stupid stuff, you know, but also serious stuff. God, if you'd get me through this illness. God, if you'd get me that job. If you would get, right? We go, if you will do this for me, I will do that for you. And we negotiate with God. I remember negotiating with God a lot during COVID. God, if you would just get us back to normal. If we could just go back to work, just go back to church, just go back to school. I promise, God, things will be different. I've learned so much from this, God. I'm a different person. I promise I'll never be the same. God, if you would just, you know the problem with negotiating with God? You don't have anything God needs. Negotiation demands that each party brings something to the table that the other one needs. You have nothing to offer. And so negotiating with God is not going to work. But this is a good thing, actually, because in the end, all God is really looking for is a heart of humility and obedience. He doesn't want anything that you have to offer. He doesn't want to negotiate with you. He just wants humility and obedience. And so Pharaoh tries to negotiate. It's like, well, I'll let you do it. And God's like, no, that's not the deal that we made. I want humility and obedience. Plague 5, some sort of disease that kills all the livestock or most of the livestock. I think we can imagine this in Oklahoma because we have lots of livestock around, right? You drive down the road, there's cows and horses in every field. Now imagine you're driving down and there's just carcasses everywhere. Like you imagine what that would do to a community. I mean, for many of you, what that would do to your personal family finances, just destroy you. This is a massive hit on Egypt. And there's something about this that you should get this. You should pay attention to this. If you are a leader, there is something about this that Pharaoh is letting his country be destroyed because of his own arrogance and his own disobedience. And if you are a leader, if you're a parent, a grandparent, if you're a leader at school, you're a leader in the community, you're a leader at work, we so often think that our posture towards God only affects us. It's not true. If you are a leader and you have influence, your posture towards God, I mean, if you are arrogant, if you are disobedient, if you are ignoring the things that God is speaking into your life, you will ruin households. You will ruin communities. This is the weight of leadership, right? So we got to wake up to this. Like our posture towards God affects people around us. Even if you can't see it, it does. And this is what Pharaoh refuses to see. He forgets this weight of leadership. God continues to give him chance after chance after chance. And now, Pharaoh, it's destroying your country. And Moses, at the end of plague number 5, now says that Pharaoh's heart is unyielding, unwilling, so arrogant, he is unwilling to budge on anything. Now, we're going through these plagues, and if you're curious like me, you might be thinking, how is this happening? I mean, these are pretty wild things that frogs are just jumping around and this infestation of gnats and flies and all this kinds of stuff. So how is this happening? I want to entertain this thought just for a minute because scholars really debate this. They kind of go back and forth on what's going on here. So it is possible that God is doing these things in this sort of supernatural, divinely appointed, miraculous kind of way, that he is speaking these plagues to happen or snapping his fingers or whatever God does. That like he is making these things happen sort of on command. It is also possible that there is a little bit of a scientific explanation to these plagues. Now, hang on, before you dismiss me, you're like, he's going liberal on us. No, listen. No matter what, it's God at work. Here, it's God at work. But I want you to walk through these plagues with me. And I want you to just think about this for a minute. So the very first thing, you go back to the blood, right? The very first thing we have is the Nile turns blood red. So in the original text, it's a little fuzzy. It could be blood. It could be blood red. It's a little unclear. But what I know is that this is a real story, real time, real place, and Moses, a real guy, is writing this, right? Yes, under the supervision and the guidance of the Lord, but it's Moses writing this. And Moses is writing a story about what he saw. He's describing things. He's going to use adjectives and illustrations. This happens in the Bible all the time, right? So go to Revelation, and it talks about the moon turning to blood. It doesn't mean that you're going to look up into the sky and the moon is literally dripping blood. It means it like turns this ominous sort of red, I think at least this ominous sort of red color, right? These illustrations and things like that. So, blood, Nile turning blood red. So some scholars would argue that this was a contamination of the water sources. There is a particular red algae that exists in that part of the world, and this is a contamination of the water sources. Again, don't dismiss, just for a minute, go with me. Because if the water of the Nile, and it says all the water sources, if the waters are contaminated, what are the frogs going to do? They're going to leave the water, right? Because it's disease. They're going to leave the water and they're going to go into cities and communities looking for places to live. If the frogs leave the water sources, what's going to happen to the gnats? They're going to flourish, right? There's no frogs to eat them, you know? And so now they're just flying around, these little bugs flying around everywhere. The text says that eventually Moses prays that the frogs will go away. There's these giant piles. They heap up piles of frog carcasses. If there are giant piles of rotting frog flesh, where do you think the flies are going? Right onto those piles, right? They're going to feast. And then, if it's going to be an infestation of flies, and then if these flies hang out around decaying frog for a while, and then they go and live among the livestock, what are they going to do? They're going to spread bacteria and disease, are they not? And so is it possible that God worked through the divine authority that he has to do these plagues on command? Of course. Is it possible that God worked through the natural order of the world that he created to make these things come about? Is it possible he used the ecosystems that he built, which, by the way, we destroyed through sin, death, and decay, to make his purposes come about? Isn't it actually kind of glorifying to God to think that God has such authority over all of creation? Remember, Psalm 24 says the earth is the Lord's. He can do anything he wants with it, whether we like it or not, it's his. Isn't it incredibly glorifying to think, what if God could use what he created to line these things up? Because the blood and the gnats and the flies, or the frogs, it all connects a little too well, don't you think? So just a theory that's out there. I don't know what I think about it, but it's just think about this stuff, because I think sometimes we could over-spiritualize or over-sensationalize when what if God is just working through the natural order of creation? Again, it's still God's power. It's still supernatural and divine. I don't know. It's just a thought to sort of toy with. Regardless, it's God at work. Regardless, it is God who is giving Pharaoh a chance to humble his heart and to listen, but he is unyielding. He is arrogant. So we turn the page to plague number 6. Boils on their skin, really uncomfortable, some sort of sore or burning on their skin. Something interesting happens right here. Moses demands that Pharaoh let the Israelites go, but the text shifts. Now it says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Before it was that Pharaoh hardened his heart. Now it's God hardening his heart. Not really sure why. I'm not sure if this is just that Pharaoh had for so long hardened his heart that, again, God finally goes, okay, if that's what you want. Not really sure. Plague number 7 is giant hailstones. These hailstones kill people and animals, wipe out fields. It seems like Pharaoh might relent during this plague, but he changes his mind. His heart is hardened. Plague number 8 is locusts. Probably need to get a pest control guy at this point. It's getting gross. Plague number 9 is darkness. 3 days and 3 nights, Egypt is completely dark. A direct assault on their highest God, who is the God of the sun. And God blacks it out so you can't see the sun. So dark you can't see your hand in front of your face. Moses describes it as a darkness that could be felt. You could feel it in your bones, in your soul, how dark it was. Worth saying, because we're headed towards Easter in the next few days, right, is that this moment actually points forward to the cross of Christ. When on that Friday afternoon, when Jesus is hanging on the cross, taking his final breath, the sky over Jerusalem goes black in the middle of the afternoon, goes dark. Locusts, hailstones, darkness. Again, you might ask, how does this happen? Scientists and historians have another possible explanation for plagues 6 through 9. In this area, around the same time that all this is happening in history in Egypt, there's a volcano called Santorini. It's up in the Mediterranean. It's absolutely beautiful. But at this time, Santorini erupts. And this eruption of that volcano is said to be the largest volcanic eruption ever witnessed by mankind. And it's just up the road. It's just up in the Mediterranean, north of Egypt. Could it be that the hailstorm is caused by this volcanic eruption? Could it be that the boils on their skin is because of the ash falling out of the sky that's acidic in nature and landing on them and burning them? Could it be that a volcanic eruption would move an entire swarm of locusts to another? I mean, could it be that the sky is dark because of, again, volcanic eruption? I grew up in the Northwest. Mount St. Helens was before my time, but I've seen pictures and heard all the stories of people talking about it. I mean, it was dark over the sky for hundreds of miles because of this cloud. I mean, just interesting to think about. Could God be working through the natural order? Again, just remember, don't dismiss it too quick. Remember, the earth is his, Psalm 24. The earth is the Lord's, everything in it. I'm not sure how he is working this out. So we get to the end of the 9th plague. We're going to stop there. We're not going to look at the 10th plague. We're going to actually look at that on Good Friday. We get to the end of the 9th plague, and God asks a question of Pharaoh. And this is where I kind of want to land this plane here. He asks him a question in chapter 10, verse 3. Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh, and they said to him, this is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Here's this question. Pharaoh, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go so that they may worship me. Pharaoh, I've given you so many chances. When is enough going to be enough? Like, what do I have to do, Pharaoh, to wake you up, to get your attention? Like, you've seen it with your own eyes. I said I was going to do it, and I've done it, and you've seen it. And yet your heart is so hard. When are you going to humble yourself? And I want to just sit in that question and kind of finish up here. Because again, I said it, God will give you the direction of your life. And if you want to choose arrogance, and if you want to choose sin, and if you want to choose disobedience, okay. And by the way, you can even claim Christianity. You can claim whatever you want, but then you make yourself the God over your life. Like, there's a point where God's going to go, okay. He'll let you even go to church. He'll let you hear his word. And then go out and do whatever you want and choose your own passions, your own desires, choose disobedience. But you know what happens is over time you become less and less bothered by it. You become less and less aware of your sin. You become less and less aware of how your arrogance lands on other people, how your disobedience affects the people around you. You become less and less aware of the ways that God is moving in your life. We can easily become like Pharaoh. We can mimic spirituality. But our heart gets so hard, we can't hear God anymore. That terrifies me. We can't hear him. We're not bothered by our arrogance, our disobedience. And we don't even know it because our heart over time has become so hardened and hardened and hardened. And so I guess just here's the invitation in the story is just to take on a posture of humility and obedience before the Lord. Like, is that you? Is that where you are, that you have a posture of humility before God? A posture of obedience before the Lord? A posture of awe? Or would Dad say that his sons and daughters are arrogant and disobedient? I want to show you one more thing. If you have a Bible, flip over to the New Testament to 2 Timothy 3. There's a whole bunch of, use your table of contents. There's a whole bunch of books that start with T in a row. 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, you get to Timothy, there's a Titus. If you go to Hebrews, you've gone too far. Let me just read this for you, because I think Paul, as he finishes up his letter to his friend Timothy, I think he's speaking to some of what we're talking about here. This idea of having this posture, we can assume this hard-hearted posture of arrogance or soft-hearted of humility. He says this in 2 Timothy chapter 3. But mark this, he says, there will be terrible times in the last days. When does he mean the last days? Don't get crazy. He just means from the time Jesus ascended into heaven until Jesus returns. And people will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy. Do you know any people like this? You've seen hearts like this? You felt like this yourself? Unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of good, treacherous, rash, conceited. I mean, he said arrogant about 16 different ways so far. Should get our attention. Lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Listen to this. Having a form of godliness, but denying its power. Let me translate that into modern day terms. Going to church, claiming Christ, and having no evidence of Jesus in their lives. Verse 6, they are the kind who worm their way into homes and gain control over gullible women who loaded down with sins and are swayed by all kinds of evil desires. They're always learning, but they're never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. Just as Jannes and Jambres opposed, who the heck is that, opposed Moses, so also these teachers oppose the truth. They are men of depraved minds who, as far as the faith is concerned, they are rejected. You know who Jannes and Jambres are? According to Jewish tradition for over centuries, those are the names of the sorcerers in Pharaoh's palace, the magicians, who had just enough spirituality to convince everybody that they were right, to convince everybody that God was with them, God was doing things through them, God was on their side, but ultimately they were opposed to God, their heart was hard, they were arrogant and disobedient. And if you're here today and you're just checking Jesus out, to be honest, this isn't really for you. This part is really just, for those of us, we want to follow Jesus, and yet through our arrogance and our disobedience and our sin, our passion, our own desires instead of the Lord's, we have set ourselves up as God over our lives. And over time, our hearts have grown harder and harder and harder. And it's just sad because we miss out on this connection and relationship with God and seeing the way God is moving in our lives. It's not a threat. That's why I said that earlier about the whole punishment thing. God doesn't punish his children. Punishment's already been done, right? But hearts can become hard. So my challenge for you today is, if necessary, if your heart, you feel like, man, my heart is hard, is to repent. Is to go to God in a posture of humility and obedience. And you look at Pharaoh, you just watch through this, and I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be hard-hearted and have just enough spirituality to convince myself that God is for me and he's blessing me, and yet my heart is growing hard and I don't see the way God is moving in my life or talking to me. I want to look at Moses as an example here, who sits and listens to God's voice. And you know what happens? Over time, his heart becomes softer. Because where did we meet Moses? Moses in the desert, he's like, God, I'm not doing what you're asking me to do. Get out of here. I don't even know who you are. And yet over time, a step of humility, a step of obedience moves him towards a soft heart. Brothers and sisters, may humility and obedience be the markers, the characters of our life today. We pray for us. Father, thank you for your word. It is like a mirror to our lives. We look into it and we see things, some things that reflect your goodness and glory, other things that we often don't really like. So God, in this moment, we come before you in humility. God, we confess to you the ways that we've been disobedient. God, we confess to you. God, I confess to you my arrogance. Would you, Father, as you promised in Ezekiel, that you will replace our heart of stone with a soft heart of flesh that is beating, full of life, that is pounding in our chest, full of life for you. God, would you do that today? Would you give us a soft heart? God, would you soften hearts towards you? God, would you soften hearts towards one another? It might be, God, that there are people in this room who are sitting next to each other, who drove in the same car here, who live in the same home, and their heart is so stinking hard against each other. Would you soften it? Would you use humility and obedience and gentleness to soften our hearts? God, we look forward to this Easter week. We want to enter it thoughtfully. We are excited to celebrate Easter, but we want to be thoughtful about the journey of our Lord and Savior, the ups and downs that Jesus experienced that week. We want to lean into that, be thoughtful and mindful of that. So would you help us with that this week, God? I do thank you for your son, Jesus, who is the ultimate example and our guide of humility and obedience. God, we thank you for today, that we could worship you today. We love you, and we pray these things in Christ's name. Amen.